The bed in room 14 had never been slept in. That was the first thing that struck Donna Packard when she pushed the door open on the morning of October 19, 1991. She had been housekeeping at the Carver Motor Inn for 11 years. She knew the shape of a used room, the dents in the pillow, the pulled sheet, the particular geometry of a night spent. Room 14 had none of it. The bed was made exactly as she had left it the afternoon before. The towels were dry, the complimentary soap still wrapped. The only sign that anyone had been there at all was a half-empty cup of vending machine coffee on the nightstand, still faintly warm, and 2 suitcases standing upright against the far wall, like sentinels waiting for someone who was never coming back. That is not a story about a couple who changed their minds and left in the night. That is a story about 2 people who walked into a small cinder-block room on a rural Tennessee highway and were swallowed by it. And it would take 30 years, a collapsed section of drywall during a renovation, and a plastic bag sealed with electrical tape to finally give Harlan County something it had never had, an answer. But before we get to that, we have to go back to the beginning. Because to understand what was lost in room 14, you first have to understand who Dale and Sandra Fitch were. They had met at a Dairy Queen in Gatlinburg in the summer of 1979. Dale was 23, home from a stint doing electrical work up in Cincinnati, and Sandra was 21. Still saving money from her shift work at a textile mill in Sevier County to take a trip she'd been planning since she was 14. A weekend in Nashville to see the Grand Ole Opry. She never made it to Nashville that summer, but she also stopped needing to. She'd found something better, she told her sister Ruth later. She'd found Dale. They married in April of 1980 in a small ceremony at Ruth's house. 23 people in folding chairs on a lawn that still had frost on it in the morning. Dale wore a bolo tie his father had given him. Sandra wore her grandmother's pearl earrings and a dress she'd made herself from a pattern she'd found in a Simplicity catalog. In the photographs from that day, the kind developed at a drugstore, printed with that warm yellow haze that photographs from 1980 always carry, they are both laughing at something off camera. Ruth never remembered what the joke was. She wishes now she had thought to ask. Dale spent the 80s doing electrical contracting work across 4 counties. He was the kind of man who would rewire a widow's kitchen at cost and spend a Saturday fixing a neighbor's water heater, just because the man was getting on in years, and Dale didn't think it was right to let him climb up on that roof alone. Sandra worked the reception desk at a dental office in Sevierville 3 days a week. And on the other days, she kept a kitchen garden, sewed quilts she donated to the Ruritan Club auction every fall, and made a blackberry cobbler that Donna Packard, who would one day open the door of room 14, described, 30 years later on the stand, as the best thing she had ever eaten in her life. By the fall of 1991, Dale was 45, and Sandra was 43. Their daughter Leah had gone off to East Tennessee State University the previous year. Their son Craig was a junior in high school and had started working weekends at his uncle's hardware store in Dandridge. The house on Crestwood Drive felt quieter than it used to. The kind of quiet that can feel peaceful if you let it, or empty if you don't. They had been talking about a weekend trip since the spring. Nothing complicated, just 2 nights somewhere, a little fall foliage, maybe a stop at the craft fair in Cosby they'd driven past every year and always meant to visit. Dale had work finishing up a job site near Jellicoe, and Sandra wanted to be close enough to the mountains that she could see the tree line from the window. The Carver Motor Inn on Route 25E sat right where both things overlapped on a map. Cheap, clean, and surrounded by enough late October color to satisfy any reasonable person's need for beauty. On the evening of October 18, 1991, Dale pulled his blue Ford F-150 into the gravel lot of the Carver Motor Inn at approximately 6:15 p.m. He paid for 2 nights in cash at the front desk, $37 per night. He signed the register as D. Fitch, Sevierville, TN, and was given room 14, second to last on the ground floor, facing the wood line. The desk clerk, a 19-year-old named Tommy Greer, watched them walk toward the room. Dale was carrying both suitcases. Sandra had a brown paper bag with a 6-pack of Pepsi and what looked like a bag of boiled peanuts from the gas station up the road. Tommy would later tell investigators that they looked happy, comfortable, like people who'd been married long enough to be easy with each other. He never saw them again. At 7:42 the following morning, October 19th, Tommy Greer was behind the desk when a trucker from the Cracker Barrel next door mentioned that the blue F-150 at the far end of the Carver lot had a flat rear tire. Tommy walked out to have a look. The truck was still in the same spot Dale had parked it the night before, driver's door unlocked, keys hanging from the ignition. An SO map of Tennessee was open across the bench seat. The tank was 3/4 full. He knocked on the door of room 14. Nothing. He knocked again. The door was not locked. He pushed it open and found exactly what Donna Packard would confirm 2 hours later when she arrived for her shift. The untouched bed, the cool, dry towels, the wrapped soap, 2 upright suitcases, the half-warm coffee, no Dale, no Sandra. He called the Campbell County Sheriff's Office at 8:09 a.m. Deputies arrived within 20 minutes. They walked the wood line behind the motel for 40 minutes without finding anything. They checked the Cracker Barrel, the gas station, the 2-lane stretch of Route 25E in both directions. They spoke to every guest in every occupied room. Nobody had heard anything. Nobody had seen anything. The couple from room 14 appeared to have stepped out of the world as cleanly and completely as if someone had simply reached down and lifted them out of it. By noon, investigators had recovered one more thing from room 14. Something Deputy Marcus Holt noted in his report, but assigned no particular significance to at the time. In the space behind the bathroom door, pushed up against the baseboard, was a single pearl earring. Small, old-fashioned. The kind a woman might wear to a wedding or a church service, or the kind of occasion that asked something of you. It matched nothing in Sandra's toiletry bag, which was still sitting on the bathroom counter, undisturbed, next to her toothbrush. They dusted room 14 for prints. They collected fibers. They interviewed Tommy Greer 3 times in the first week. They canvassed a 7-mile stretch of the highway. And in all of that, through all of that careful official motion, investigators found nothing that told them what had happened after Tommy Greer watched 2 people walk toward a door in the yellow light of a Friday evening in October. The Fitch family arrived within 24 hours. Ruth drove down from Sevierville with her husband. Craig drove himself. Leah got a ride from a classmate who owned a car and didn't ask questions. They sat in the Cracker Barrel parking lot across from the Carver Motor Inn and looked at room 14 from the outside, its brown door closed, and tried to understand something that had no shape they could hold. The lead investigator on the case was Sergeant Bill Tanner of the Campbell County Sheriff's Office, a 15-year veteran who had worked his share of missing persons cases in the mountains and knew how many of them resolved badly. He was 41 years old, had 2 kids of his own, and he drove the Route 25E corridor for 6 consecutive evenings after the initial search, just looking. He didn't find anything. He didn't stop looking. There was one name that came up early. A man named Roy Stokes had been staying in room 12, 2 doors down from the Fitches, the same night. His checkout record showed he'd left the following morning before 7 a.m., which made him the last registered guest to depart before the disappearance was discovered. Tanner tracked him to a boarding house in La Follette and spent 3 days building a circumstantial picture that, on its best day, looked promising, and on its worst day, explained nothing. Roy Stokes was a long-haul delivery driver with no prior record, a convincing account of his route, and a CB radio log that placed him 40 miles east of Harlan by 7:30 that morning. He cooperated fully. He was eliminated. The F-150 was impounded and processed. Nothing of evidentiary significance was found inside it. By the end of November 1991, the Fitch case had been submitted to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation as a missing persons file. No foul play officially confirmed. No suspect. No motive. No answers. The years that followed were the kind that leave marks you don't notice until you look in the mirror one morning and see them all at once. Ruth kept a binder. She started it in December of 1991, filled with copies of news clippings, TBI correspondence, notes from calls she'd made to the sheriff's office, a photograph of Dale and Sandra paper clipped to the inside front cover. By 1995, the binder was 3 inches thick. By 2001, it was a second binder. She wrote to every agency she could think of. The FBI, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Adults, senators, congressmen, most wrote back. None of them had anything new to tell her. The Carver Motor Inn changed hands in 1997. The new owner repainted the exterior and replaced the sign, but left the interior largely untouched. Room 14 was cleaned and rented out like any other room for the next 2 decades. Guests slept there without knowing anything had happened. The room held its secret the way rooms do, not by hiding it, but simply by being a room. Craig Fitch got married in 1998. He named his first son Dale. He kept a framed photograph of his parents on the mantel of his living room. The one from Ruth's wedding where they were both laughing at something nobody could remember anymore. Every October 18th, he drove to the Carver Motor Inn and sat in the parking lot for a while. He never went inside. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He kept doing it anyway. Leah Fitch completed her nursing degree and took a job at a hospital in Knoxville. She called Ruth every Sunday. She did not drive to the Carver Motor Inn every October 18th. That was Craig's thing, and she respected it. She had her own thing, which was that she kept her mother's recipe for blackberry cobbler in a plastic sleeve inside the front cover of her cookbook, and she made it every year on her parents' wedding anniversary. She told her own children it was their grandmother's recipe. She told them about the pearl earrings. She told them about the bolo tie. Sergeant Bill Tanner retired from the Campbell County Sheriff's Office in 2008. Before he cleaned out his desk, he made a copy of the Fitch case file and took it home in a cardboard box, which he kept in his garage on a shelf between his fishing tackle and a broken snowblower. He pulled it out every so often. He added notes when something occurred to him. After a while, the notes stopped, because nothing new was occurring to him. But he kept the box. The reward poster that Ruth had printed in 1992 and pinned to the bulletin board of the Cracker Barrel across the street had faded to near nothing by 2005. Nobody took it down. It hung there through 3 ownership changes and 2 renovations. A pale ghost of a thing that people stopped seeing the way you stopped seeing the furniture in your own house. Then, in the spring of 2021, a construction crew arrived at the Carver Motor Inn. The motel had been purchased the previous year by a developer out of Knoxville, who planned to gut and remodel it as extended stay lodging. The renovation began in March. Room 14 was one of 12 rooms being fully stripped, flooring, ceiling, and walls down to the studs. The crew started from the bathroom and worked outward. On the morning of March 11, 2021, a worker named James Cord was pulling drywall from the section of wall between the bathroom and the exterior wall of room 14, the section directly behind where the vanity mirror had hung for 30 years, when a panel came loose in a way that felt wrong. Not the way drywall comes loose when you pull it. The way something comes loose when there is something behind it that was never meant to be found. He called over his foreman. His foreman called the site manager. The site manager called the Campbell County Sheriff's Office. What they found in the gap between the bathroom wall and the outer cinder block, in a space roughly 18 inches deep and 5 feet tall, sealed with a piece of drywall that had been fastened from the inside, was a plastic bag. A grocery bag, the kind that would have come from a Kroger or a Food City in 1991. It was sealed with multiple wraps of black electrical tape, the tape still intact. The kind of tight, methodical wrapping that speaks of someone taking their time. Inside the bag, a man's wallet containing a Tennessee driver's license in the name of Dale Raymond Fitch, $43 in cash, and a business card for an electrical subcontracting firm in Sevierville. A woman's wristwatch, the kind with a small face and a silver band. A folded piece of paper, a registration confirmation printed on Carver Motor Inn letterhead, Room 14, October 18th, 20th, 1991, in the name of D. Fitch, and wrapped separately in a strip of that same black electrical tape, a pearl earring. Small, old-fashioned, a match to the one found behind the bathroom door in 1991. It had been there the entire time, behind the wall of a room that had been cleaned, rented, slept in, and walked through for 30 years. Someone had put it there. Someone had known exactly what was in that bag. And that person had either left through the window of room 14, through the door, or through neither, which meant they had come from somewhere inside the building. The TBI took over the investigation within 48 hours. A forensic team processed the bag, the wallet, the watch, and the earring. The drywall panel and the fasteners that had secured it from within the wall cavity were submitted for analysis. And the 30-year-old case file that Bill Tanner kept in a cardboard box in his garage was finally pulled into the light. What investigators found when they began reconstructing the physical layout of the Carver Motor Inn as it existed in October of 1991 was something nobody had thought to look for the first time around. Between room 14's bathroom wall and the cinderblock exterior ran a service corridor, narrow, unlit, accessible through a utility door at the far end of the building that led to the furnace and the electrical panels. The corridor existed on the original building schematic, filed with Campbell County in 1967 when the motel was built. It was roughly 18 inches wide enough for a thin person to move through sideways if they knew where they were going. In 1991, that utility door had a lock. The lock was a standard pin tumbler. TBI investigators working with a locksmith confirmed that the mechanism was the kind that could be defeated with a bump key or a properly tensioned pick. Tools available to anyone who knew what they were doing. An electrical contractor, for instance, would know what they were doing. The investigation that followed ran 18 months. It crossed into 4 states. It ran DNA from the 1991 evidence swabs through GEDmatch and found a partial genealogical profile that eventually, after 7 months of cross-referencing, resolved itself into a name. A man named Gerald Pell. In 1991, Gerald Pell had been 47 years old, a self-employed electrician and handyman who operated across the northeastern Tennessee mountain counties and had, records showed, performed maintenance work at the Carver Motor Inn on at least 3 documented occasions between 1988 and 1991, the last time being in August of that year. 2 months before the Fitches checked in, he had appeared in no witness account. His name had not come up once in the original investigation. He had known the building's layout because he had worked in it. He had known about the service corridor because he had walked it himself. replacing wiring. Gerald Pell had died in 2009 of a cardiac event at his home in Scott County, Tennessee, leaving behind no family to notify and no confession on record. He had lived for 18 years after the night of October 18, 1991, in a county less than 40 miles from where Dale and Sandra Fitch had last been seen alive. The Fitch family was told on a Tuesday morning in September of 2022 by two TBI investigators who drove to Ruth's house and sat down at her kitchen table. Ruth was 72 years old. She had the binder in front of her before they said a single word. She had known, she told investigators afterward, the moment she saw their faces at the door. Not what they were going to say exactly, but the shape of it. The TBE confirmed the Dina attribution publicly that October. The case was formally closed as a homicide investigation with identified perpetrator, Gerald Pell, deceased. The remains of Dale and Sandra Fitch have not been recovered, and as of the filing of this documentary record, the investigation into possible burial or disposal sites continues in 3 counties. Leah Fitch gave a statement to the press outside her home in Knoxville on October 21, 2022. A date that would have been her parents' 42nd wedding anniversary. She did not read from notes. She stood on her front step in the morning light and said that her mother had made folding chairs look like thrones, and her father had never once passed a broken-down car on the road without stopping to help. She said that room 14 had held something of theirs for 30 years. Something small, something physical, something her mother had worn to her own wedding, and that in some way she couldn't fully explain. She was grateful it had been kept. That the wall had kept it. That it had come back. Craig Fitch drove to the site of the Carver Motor Inn in October of 2022. The building had been partially demolished by then, the renovation abandoned when the ownership transferred following the investigation. He parked in the gravel lot and sat for a long time. He said later that it was different from the other times he had sat there. He didn't try to explain how. Bill Tanner was 72 years old and living in La Follette when the TBI called him. He drove in from his house to the county records office and spent 3 hours with the investigators going over notes he had made 30 years before. Notes that had seemed like dead ends at the time and had stayed that way for 3 decades. He did not say he felt vindicated. He said he felt tired in a way that wasn't bad, a different kind of tired than he had felt for a long time. The case of Dale and Sandra Fitch changed one thing in Campbell County almost immediately. The county updated its maintenance records protocol for commercial properties, requiring that structural access points and service corridors be documented and inventoried during any investigation involving a commercial building. A small thing. A bureaucratic thing. The kind of thing that might, sometime in the years ahead, prevent another 30 years from passing before a wall says what it has been holding. Forensic genealogy, the science that connected Adina Swab from 1991 to a name in a family tree in 2021, was used in fewer than a dozen cold cases when the Fitch investigation began. It is now used in more than 200 active investigations nationwide. There are names in databases right now that are 3 matching relatives away from telling a family what happened. The wall has already opened in some of those cases. The others are waiting. What does it mean that Gerald Pell lived 40 miles from that motel for 18 years, drove the same highways, bought groceries in the same towns, and died in his own house without consequence? What does it say about the cases still in cardboard boxes in retired detectives' garages? And what do you make of the fact that the 2 people who loved Dale and Sandra Fitch most never stopped? Not for 30 years, not once. Even when there was no reason left but the love itself. If this case stayed with you, subscribe. There are more families still waiting for their wall to open, and this channel exists to help them be remembered while they do. And if you know someone who remembers the mountains in October of 1991, the cases in the description below are still looking for what's hidden behind theirs. Thank you for being here.